Thank you very much, Dr. Kaiser, and welcome everyone. We're glad you could join us this morning, and I will be the facilitator for the morning sessions. So firstly, I would like to present our first speaker this morning. He is Dan-Adrian Petre. He is the coordinator for the Adventus Center for Adventist Studies at Adventus University in Romania. He earned his Ph.D. in systematic theology from the Adventist International Institute of Advanced Studies in the Philippines, also known as AIAS. And he has published his dissertation titled Knowing God as an Evangelical Towards a Canonical Epistemological Model, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2023. And he also co-edited the book Affirming Our Identity, Current Theological Issues Challenging the Seventh-day Adventist Church, published by Safeliz in 2023 also. And today, Dan-Adrian will be presenting his presentation is titled Ellen White's Pre-Human Angelic Fall and John Milton's Paradise Lost, a Comparison. He will have about 40 to 45 minutes for the presentation. And we also remind attendees that they may submit their questions via the Zoom chat for the panel discussion this afternoon. So, Dr. Petre, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Walter, for the introduction. I appreciate being here. It's the first time. I think last year when Dennis was telling me about this conference, he was here in Romania presenting for our international conference. So I remember back then he was in the first day, when he arrived, he was connected to this conference, this symposium. Yeah, it was interesting. So as mentioned, my presentation, I will share my screen with you. I think you can see it, right? Just give me a yes or a hand just to know that is all right. Okay, thank you. So Ellen White's pre-human and angelic, pre-human angelic fall and John Milton's Paradise Lost, the comparison. I did not prepare a PowerPoint presentation, and you will see why, because I have to show some things to compare, and it would have been more difficult using a PowerPoint presentation. So I think we are all familiar with the issue of the relationship between the authority of Ellen G. White's writings and the Bible. This was addressed by many Adventist scholars. I have a list here in my paper. While the bulk of Ellen White's presentation is Bible-based, there are several places where she provides extra scriptural details. So this triggered my interest many years ago when I was converted, and through reading the writings of Ellen G. White, through reading actually the first chapters from Patriarchs and Prophets, and especially the fall of Lucifer into sin. So that description helped me go back to God. I didn't want to be on Satan's side, So that helped me a lot. So from that moment, this was like 2000, I was always fascinated and interested in this topic. I didn't have time to go in depth. I didn't have the expertise many years ago. I didn't have the time, but I did it during my certificate program in Ellen G. White and Adventist Studies. Now, the fall into sin of Lucifer in the pre-human history is presented in detail, some detail, in 1858 in the book titled Spiritual Gifts, The Great Controversy Between Christ and His Angels and Satan and His Angels. This is important just to see from the title that Ellen White wanted to convey this great controversy imagery. And later this was expanded in the Spirit of Prophecy with almost the same, the same subtitle. And further on, in Patriarchs and Prophets, or the great conflict between good and evil, as illustrated in the lives of holy men of old. Now, for example, Walter Ree accused her of misleading her readers by giving vividness and form to John Milton's great poem, that is Paradise Lost, and presenting extra-canonical visions of the dialogue, battle, and ouster of Satan and his angels from heaven as if she saw them in her visions. Malcolm Bull and Kate Lockhart argued that her account was conceived like the War of Independence, with Satan acting like the American revolutionaries and the Godhead representing the reigning monarchy, having its source, they say, probably in Paradise Lost, as she follows John Milton's narrative almost completely, they say, including his description of Satan's speeches. Another author, Thomas McElwain, agrees, noting that the cosmic dualism, much in the style of John Milton, pervades her writings. Now, Jan Bickford contends that by accepting and internalizing John Milton's narrative, Seventh-day Adventism comprised not only the most extensive absorption of Milton into American religious, political, and literary life, but also one of the most important. More recently, Ronald Graybill argues that a very high percentage of Mrs. White's non-biblical or extra-biblical details are parallel to Milton's epic poem. Now, all these assertions, and some of them assume a narrow view of inspiration, something close to verbal inspiration. These assertions received an answer, and I have here two. One is from William Clarence, Willie White, W.C. White, Ellen White's son, and another one from Arthur White, her grandson. In an address to faculty and students in 1935, Willie White writes that when Ellen White was writing on the lines of the early patriarchs, and please note that the lines of the early patriarchs, Jane Andrews was visiting at our home, he continues, and after the dinner was over, Mother would propose to read him and Father what she had been writing. And then both Elder White and Elder Andrews were attentive listeners, and one day after 2 or 3 chapters had been read to them, Elder Andrews said, "Sister White, have you ever read Milton's Paradise Lost?" "No," she replied. "Have you ever read any of his writings?" Again, she replied, "No." A few weeks later, he brought a copy of Paradise Lost and read to Father and Mother some of Milton's descriptions of the experiences of Lucifer in the Great Rebellion. Later on, he brought a new copy which he purchased and gave it to Mother. She thanked him for the book and looked at it for a few minutes without opening it, putting it on a high shelf in a cupboard built in the back of the stove and under the chimney support. There the book lay many days and several years. In view of the fact that a careless statement has been made by one of our much-loved teachers that Milton's Paradise Lost was a favorite book of Sister White's, and that she read it often, I think it is worthwhile to make this clear in a full statement and to add to the above that I never saw Milton's poem in her hand and never saw her reading it. I never heard her refer to the book except on 1 or 2 occasions when she stated to visitors what I have related above and said that she felt that she ought not to study what anyone else had written regarding the rebellion in heaven until she had written out very fully what had been revealed to her. Answering the same assertion, Arthur White, in a 1944 ministry article, talks about how Ellen White shared her vision with a group of believers in Battle Creek, Michigan. And then he writes, as she spoke of the fall of Satan and the fall of man in the plan of salvation, and then that reminded Andrews of John Milton's Paradise Lost. And when he next had opportunity, he asked Mrs. White whether she had ever read the book. She replied, and again, the same ideas like in Willie White, she replied that she had not. And he said, you will be interested in it. So the next time he came to the home, he brought a copy and placed it in her hands. She was in the midst of her writing on the controversy story, while Willie White says the patriarchs. She took the book to the kitchen and placed it on a high shelf out of reach and out of sight, determined that if there was anything in it which was in any way similar to what had been shown to her in vision, she would not read it until she had finished her writing. She did not wish anything to obscure her clear view or to open the way for anyone to say that she received her inspiration from others. It was not until she had written her first views of the controversy that she read with interest not only Paradise Lost, but also accounts of the scenes of the Reformation by various historians. Now, there are some differences between these two accounts, and we will talk about them. Now, other persons asked the White Estate about the relationship between Ellen White's writings and John Milton's poem. For example, Bernice Baker asked and received an answer from Arthur White on 25th of February 1953, and he synthesized the explanation in the ministry article that I just read, and he added, and in my own thinking, I'm of the opinion that John Milton was favored with a clear revelation of the fall of man. And then he notes that he's not having something more definitive in regard to that question. Arthur White later received actually received a reference to Paradise Lost in Ellen White's book Education from Charles Weniger, the dean of the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary, then part of the Potomac University. And when he was asked again about the same topic in 1967 by Minon A. Ham, he presented the details from the ministry article that I mentioned, and then added that Ellen White may have read portions of it, that is Paradise Lost, or all of it at a later time, indicating that a part of one sentence is quoted in Education. And then he states, and this is interesting, when I'm asked as to the similarity in theme and in description of the Lost of Paradise, I have told folk that it is my opinion that Milton himself may have had revealed to him by vision some of these same scenes as were later revealed to Ellen White. In my way of thinking, this would not have been beyond possibility. It is a very simple thing to fall into the pitfall of assuming that Ellen White received her information from some other literary work or some other individual, because there are some parallels in the presentation. I have dealt with this in a presentation, and he continues. And then he restates what he wrote in the ministry article and refers again to the Education quotation. Nevertheless, in spite of these answers of Arthur White, Willie White, the issue remained. Nowadays, various websites and sites present the similarities between Ellen White's writings and Milton poems, or point to the parallels to Gustave Doré's illustrations of the Paradise Lost that appear to reflect Ellen White's vision of the fall of Satan. Now, Ellen White might have been and was familiar with Milton's theological ideas, but still one wonders about the connection between her description and the poem that Milton wrote. And I'm aiming to explore this relationship and to look at especially spiritual gifts and spirit of prophecy, and explore the parallels with Milton's poem, especially in the spirit of prophecy. So I don't go into patriarchs and prophets. There is another researcher that did that many years ago, and I will refer to that in a moment. Now, it was on March 14, and I think you already know this story, so I will not spend too much time with it. While attending and speaking at a funeral in Lovett's Grove, today part of Bowling Green, Ellen White had a vision, and in addition to other details, she saw, quote, most of the matter of the great controversy she had seen 10 years before and was instructed that she must write it out. Now, Willie White notes half a century later that the vision lasted 2 hours, and then Ellen White continues and says that, writes that Satan made strong efforts to hinder me, but the angels of God helped her. A couple of days later, as you know, Ellen White had a stroke, and then following the prayers of her friends, the power of Satan was broken, and she started step by step, line by line, to write her vision. 1 page a day, then rest 3 days while she gradually recovered. Now, in May, she attended a general conference in Battle Creek. And we have a report in Review and Herald, a report by Ras Smith, and he writes about Ellen White's relating a portion of the views she had concerning the fall of Satan, the plan of salvation, and the great controversy between Christ and his angels and Satan and his. So we have this March vision, and then in May we have the this conference, and the 22nd of May 1858, in which Ellen White presented her vision, and Uriah Smith writes that abounded in startling facts and vivid descriptions. Now, if Arthur White's recollection and description of Andrews's question is accurate, then it might be that Jane Andrews participated at this conference, and this is the only conference that we know of where Ellen White presented her vision before publishing it. Now, if Willie White's recollections is accurate, then Andrews visited the Whites and listened to Ellen White's presentation at their home while she was writing. A probable date for this is April 1858, because we know that Andrews visited Battle Creek during that time. Furthermore, we know that Willie White was about 3 years and a half old. Arthur White was not born yet. So maybe Willie White knew about this episode either directly from Ellen White, as he implies, or indirectly Arthur White. That's his case. Irrespective of the month when Andrews met Ellen White, the fact, and this is important, I emphasize this, the fact that he did meet her and presented her Paradise Lost is certain. I did not find explicit descriptions of the fall of Satan before Ellen White's published her vision. We know of a book notice that appeared in Review and Herald on 18th of March, 1858, promoting the book, Hastings' books, The Great Controversy Between God and Man. But this is a different book. Ellen White was accused of plagiarizing this book, but actually, if you compare the two books, Hastings limits the Great Controversy to the earth and has a different focus and structure. And he does not describe the fall of Lucifer, which is my concern here. Now, later that June, an announcement that Ellen White's book is now in the press appeared, and then 2.5 months later, we discovered that some already pre-ordered the book. 50 cents was the price, and on August 26, we know that it was not still ready. On September 9, James White presents The Spiritual Gifts, a work of 224 pages, written by Mrs. White, and with an introduction by Cottrell. And then it is mentioned that the book is already sent to those who ordered it. So we have the vision in March and the book published in September. Probably, according to this, Ellen White wrote Spiritual Gifts Volume 1 from the second half of March until the beginning of June, the same year, 1858. The description of Satan's fall is short, only 4 paragraphs long, with a total of 693 words. So I'm presenting now the development of Ellen White's presentation of Lucifer's fall. Now, if we compare this material with the one in the Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 1, this description is expanded to 12 paragraphs with a total of 2,000 words. Now, if we compare the material side by side, we can quickly see how Ellen White developed her argument. Now, in the presentation that follows, I mean, this comparison I have highlighted with yellow, you will see this color, the common material between the first chapters of spiritual gifts and the Spirit of Prophecy. And with orange, I have highlighted the common material between the two chapters, indicating with a superscript number the order of appearance. And with gray, I have highlighted the ideas from spiritual gifts that are amplified in the Spirit of Prophecy, marking in the Spirit of Prophecy the core ideas developed by the author. So I will just present this table this manner, so that I hope it's visible, not too small. Okay, so for example, we have here in the okay, let me make it yeah, maybe it's visible, hopefully. So like this. All right. So left is Spirit of Prophecy, right? Left is the spiritual gifts. Spirit of Prophecy is on the right. 1858, 1870. The Lord had showed me, I will not read everything, but I will just exemplify with this, showed me that Satan was once an honored angel in heaven next to Jesus Christ, and then next to God's dear Son, his countenance. So we have these expressions that appear there. His form was perfect, his bearing noble and majestic. There are some changes in the wording, as we can see, and also development. For example, if we look down, we have here, I have highlighted this one. When God said to his Son, let us make man in our image, Satan was jealous of Jesus. And then here we have a development of this idea. And then Satan was envious and jealous of Jesus because Christ was consulted, was part of the creation of the world, and Satan was not. So we have this development here. And then she continues and she develops in the Spirit of Prophecy. You can see this here, this development. For example, if we actually, this is, I think it is here, okay. We have the same ideas on the right here, but a development of these ideas and an expansion in the two columns. For example, when we have this paragraph, and it was decided that the Satan should be expelled, and then here we have a development of these ideas, and Ellen White was accused of taking Milton's words and using them as if she saw them in a vision. We will look at the similarities and the differences immediately. I will not, I can provide you with the paper for those who are interested. I don't have time to read all the elements. I will just highlight some of them that I've written down here. First of all, in the Spirit of Prophecy, she removed the expressions, the Lord has shown me, or I saw, which she has in the spiritual gifts. Second, Satan's description is amplified, indicating that a special light that shone around him brighter and more beautiful than around other angels. Third, Ellen White mentions that God convened the heavenly assembly to declare that Jesus was equal with him and that they planned to create a new world. Fourth, she details the thoughts of Satan regarding the Son. Fifth, she presents Satan gathering the angels and telling them that once Christ is named ruler, all the sweet liberty the angels had enjoyed was at an end. Sixth, she details the reasoning of the loyal angels and even their weeping. Seventh, Ellen White adds that Satan refuses to listen, accusing the loyal angels of being slaves and so on. Eighth, um, Ellen White presents Satan telling the angels that those who were following him that they have gone too far to go back. Then she presents loyal angels flying to Jesus and to inform about the rebellion. So we have these elements that I'm presenting now that she expanded in spirit of prophecy. So the development of the spiritual gifts part. And these descriptions, they are very similar to John Milton's description. I mean, similar and different also. I will indicate that immediately. Now, we have these, for example, the angels, they weep after hearing Satan's accusations. And then Ellen White presents the celestial assembly to acknowledge and adore the God of justice. And then they mourn again for their former companions. And then we have this consultation between the Father and the Son regarding the future equality of humans with angels. And these 12 aspects support, of course, the apparent conclusion that Ellen White described her vision in broad strokes in spiritual gifts, and later she expanded it in the spirit of prophecy. Now, I go to the comparison between the spirit of prophecy and the paradise lost, and this is the core of my paper, my presentation, because the content of the first chapter of the Spirit of Prophecy has common ideas similarly organized as they appear in Joel Milton's Paradise Lost. So I compared already the Spirit of Prophecy with Milton's poem, and I have highlighted with green the ideas from Milton's poem that appear in Ellen White's material. And then I use the superscript number to note the order of ideas. And then with lavender, I have highlighted the common material that does not appear on the same line in the table. So I'm going to show you this now, and trying to put this like, let's see, 400, that's too much. Let me put it to 300 like this. So we have here Paradise Lost, and here we have, okay, the Spirit of Prophecy. Maybe this is too big, 200. Okay. So, for example, we have here on page 16, a description of Satan, and then we have this light that surrounds him, brighter and more beautiful than the other angels. We have this, and then brighter ones amidst the host of angels, and so on. The ideas are appearing in Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is here on the right side of your screen as you look. And then we have the assembly of the heavenly host, and then Satan is envious on Jesus. So we see the same order of ideas that appear in both materials, and similar description. So this idea that the loyal angels, and there are some differences. Ellen White uses loyal angels, and then Milton uses the Abdiel angel that is loyal, and he goes back and forth between the angels and Christ. And then the discussions that they have, Satan refuses to listen, so, some idea that appear not on the same line, but for example here, that the angels were warned to close their ears to Satan's deceptive reasonings. They still have time, but they should not delay in doing it, and the same idea that we have here in Paradise Lost. So book and the line, book 5 and the line we have in the Paradise Lost, the numbers, I mean. And then we have these ideas that are recurring, same order. You can see the document ending with this idea that they are planning, the Father and the Son, to create a new world. And then John Milton, the same idea. So it's spread out in his poem, but it's the same order of ideas. So in John Milton, I went through, I mean, from the first book down to the 7th here. I mean, not in all of them we have the details, but we have the same order, and that's important to note. Now, there are several aspects worthy of notice here. Regarding similarities, Ellen White first seems to follow the same order of events as presented in Paradise Lost, books 5 and 6. The lines are indicated, except for Lucifer's description. She describes Lucifer as brighter than the other angels, just like Milton. Second, Ellen White indicates that the Father's decree of exalting the Son triggered Lucifer envy. Third, she presents Lucifer assembling the angels while concealing his real reason for rebelling against the divine government. Fourth, the central motive of Satan's contention is the perceived lack of freedom following the exaltation of Jesus. Fifth, following Satan's speech, a loyal angel defends God's decision. While Milton indicates, as mentioned, one loyal angel, Abdiel, Ellen White mentions angels generically. Sixth, Satan refuses to listen, and a multitude of angels express their desire to follow him. Seventh, Ellen White presents the loyal angels. Milton has only Abdiel, warning Satan and indicating God's power to punish. Eighth, Ellen White integrates the appeal of loyal angels to go and confess they are wrong, though not in the same order found in Paradise Lost. So I've highlighted with lavender in the text. Milton presents the same idea in the first discourse of the loyal angel. Ninth, both Milton and Ellen White indicate sorry for that, that the angels goes to inform God about the revolt that is about to take place. Both authors suggest that God is already prepared. Ellen White details that the Father conferenced with the Son regarding the solution to the ensuing conflict, revolt, while Milton just presents the Father as deciding. 10th, White describes the heaven as in commotion, with the angels marshaled in companies, each division with a higher commanding angel at their head, a language reminiscent of Milton's description of the two armies. 11th, both authors indicate that the central issue is the freedom of the will concerning the divine law. Satan rejects the latter to further the former, while God uplifts the law to ensure the angel's happiness. 12th, similar to Milton, Ellen White presents the Son of God, Prince of Heaven, and his loyal angels engage in conflict with the arch rebel and those who united with him, and describes the war succinctly, unlike Milton, pointing out that when Satan and his followers were expelled, the heavenly host rejoiced and praised God. Milton ends his 6th book with a rejoicing in heaven due to the Son's victory. 13th, Ellen White ends her chapter with another divine counsel, similar to Milton, and she indicates that once humans would pass God's test, they will eventually be equal with angels, an idea that Milton also has. But there are also some important differences indicating, and this is important, that Ellen White only used material that suited her perspective and purposes. First, whereas Milton indicates envy and pride as primary motives for Lucifer's fall, White uses the motif of Lucifer's dissatisfaction with not having access to the divine counsel and plans. This is a recurring um, usage that Ellen White has. Repeatedly, she mentions that. Second, Ellen White emphasizes that the personal desire of Satan was to lead the angelic host, while Milton affirms it only through Abdiel's speeches. Ellen White presents Satan as flattering himself that yet uh, he should yet have all the angels on his side, and he would be equal with God himself. Third, there is no parallel for the repenting angels and Satan's subsequent discourse, as Ellen White presents in The Spirit of Prophecy, paragraph on pages 20 and 21. Furthermore, the idea that God would not forgive appears logically connected to the previous appeal to repent. Fourth, in describing the preparation of the war in heaven, Ellen White uses warfare language but limits it to only organizational aspects, whereas Milton presents a vivid and very materialistic portrayal of the two armies fighting with one another, having a physical clash. Fifth, Ellen White adds that the Heavenly Council is summoned to have each case determined, and she portrays Satan as urging God to accept him as equal, but he is rejected. Sixth, Ellen White presents Satan as indicating to his followers, comprising, she mentions, nearly one half of all the angels, and exclaimed, these are with me. Will you expel these also and make such a void in heaven? This idea of Satan reigning over half of the, quoting from Paradise Lost, divided empire with heaven's king, appears in another section of Milton's poem and is thus remotely connected to Ellen White's presentation. Seventh, there are no parallels for the mourning of good angels in heaven. Eighth, Ellen White mentions a war in heaven without offering the details. Milton's combat, as mentioned, was very corporeal, although he carefully notes that the angels are spirit functioning differently. For Milton, the war lasts 3 celestial days, during which Satan invents war machines and appears to push the good forces back until Jesus enters the battle and drives Satan and his hordes to hell. Ninth, Ellen White avoids presenting Satan in hell and avoids presenting him as immortal as in himself, as Milton does. So, did Ellen White use Paradise Lost? That's the question. Now, I have several observations before presenting my answer. John Milton did not write in a vacuum. So he built on the framework of this controversy between good and evil from a Bible that he could read in several languages, including Hebrew and Greek. But he also used various other sources for his poem. For example, citing an occasion of the celebration of the Son's kingship as the occasion for Satan's revolt. This is perfectly orthodox in terms of a 17th century Protestant theology. End quote of Stella Reward. Furthermore, Paradise Lost has a profusion of thematic and structural elements from a great many literary genres and modes, as well as a myriad of specific allusions to major literary texts and exemplary works. So this is Barbara Kiefer-Lewalski. So the idea is that he did not write in a vacuum. As C.S. Lewis mentioned, his poem was overwhelmingly Christian and reflecting Christianity's great central tradition. And this also applies to the Paradise Lost cosmic conflict perspective. Second, Milton's poem was very influential with its cosmic conflict perspective. For example, John Wesley recommends his assistants, that is, circuit preachers, to read in order, slowly, and with much prayer among several books, Milton's Paradise Lost. Both of them, I mean, John and Charles Wesley, were influenced by Milton's poem, and by way of return, John Wesley was really helpful in fostering the appreciation of Milton's poem during the 18th century. For example, he recommended for a school that he founded various passages from Milton for the children to transcribe and repeat weekly. So we have this idea that Milton is very present there in that mood. Ellen White did not write in a vacuum either. She shared this Wesleyan Methodist perspective on salvation, and she was familiar with this language and with this meta-narrative. Now, although she was not educated formally, we know that when she died, she owned more than 1,000 books. So she had an extensive library, and she used that library when she described her visions. Now, answering the question, did Ellen White use Milton's poem in her description of the pre-human angelic fall? Yes, there is strong evidence that Ellen White critically used Milton's poem to amplify the content of the first chapter of spiritual gifts into the material of the first chapter of Spirit of Prophecy. And critical is important because she wanted to, I mean, she used Milton's ideas and the order of events as a commonsensical structure that reflected the biblical worldview and also reflected that was also reflected in the great controversy vision that she received. And this fact does not deny her inspiration. Rather, it reveals that inspiration is more, as Dennis Kaiser noted in his Trust and Doubt book, is divine, human, integrated, holistic, and a dynamic process to convey an authoritative message from God. So she used that probably, according to what I see, and later she refined and nuanced the same material when presenting it in Patriarchs and Prophets. We have an author, Burgesson, that made a comparison between Patriarchs and Prophets and Ellen White. It's an old material. I had access to it at a point in time. I thank you, Dennis, for that, because you gave me the scanned copy of that material, and she compares it, but she doesn't draw a clear conclusion. So in conclusion, what I can say is that Ellen White was honest. She was not a fraud, as others have accused her. She used creatively and critically several ideas and the sequence of events from Milton to amplify what she saw in her vision. In Spirit of Prophecy, she selectively used Paradise Lost to communicate the divinely inspired message. Now, in Spiritual Gifts, she might have echoed ideas and their sequence from what she heard maybe from Andrews or other sources on the fall of Lucifer, or what she received in vision. Her agreement with the subsequent research on the topic is further evidence that she was not simply echoing her contemporary understanding, but the biblical worldview of a cosmic conflict between Christ and Satan. It will be interesting to do some more research on this, to see how she used the ideas from the Spirit of Prophecy, this section, in other writings, or to compare, to expand the comparison, or to explore the impact of Paradise Lost in American Methodism, or to dig more into that to see how much that impacted Ellen G. White. So thank you for listening. I think my time is up, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Petre. And we will now have a response. So I will invite Dr. Jon Stefansson, and I would like to present him. He completed his doctorate in systematic theology at Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam in 2021. And there and elsewhere, he has written on Ellen White's redemption history. Jon is from Iceland and is currently working as an independent scholar. So thank you for being with us, Dr. Stefansson, and you have around 10 minutes for your response.
Thank you very much. Let's see here. Yes. Dr. Adrian, as someone who personally enjoys the writings of both Milton and White, I want to thank you for your presentation. And without further ado, I'll commence my response. I'm reading a truncated version for time's sake, but I will send you the full-length version afterwards and to anyone else who is interested. So I'm going to first comment on the paper, section by section, and then move on to some broader suggestions. So in the introduction, we have a literature review. I think that it is succinct and sufficient. True, for example, Bergeson is missing, but the author notes this himself, which implies that he will most likely include her in his final version of the paper. What I miss in the literature review is more critical engagement. First, the possibility of White's claim to not have read Milton should be discussed instead of accepted as self-evidently true. But more importantly, the accounts of her statement should be critically evaluated. Neither James White, Ellen White, J.N. Andrews, nor J.N. Loughborough, the first Adventist historian, nor anyone else seems to have written about this event of Andrews discussing Paradise Lost with Ellen White before W.C. White or Willie in 1935, which is nearly 80 years after it supposedly happened. Willie was 4 years old in 1858, yet he begins his account of the discussion between his parents and Andrews with, "I remember." That's possibly to be doubted. Moving on to Arthur White's accounts, he sticks with the 1858 date, but leaves out Willie's sobremesa setting. So he moves it to the General Conference instead. When it comes to whether White read Milton before writing her own account or after, Arthur's accounts vary. So that's something to explore as well. But enough on this section. The next section in the chapter is about the historical context in which Ellen White wrote her great controversy vision. I have nothing particular to say here. This is kind of the standard account that is usually given on this. The next two sections take us to the development of White's account of Lucifer's fall and the comparison with her accounts to those of Milton. Here, I appreciate the inclusion of the actual groundwork research, the stuff in the comparison columns. This is an improvement on Bergeson and Bickford, who don't include anything similar. What I feel is missing here, which the paper kind of asks for, is to bring the aspects that Ellen White develops, on one hand, and her similarities and dissimilarities, all of which is kind of fleshed out in the paper, together into a discussion. That is, was White amplifying rather the points where she agrees with Milton or those where she disagrees? In the next section, did Ellen White use Paradise Lost? I appreciate the contribution about Milton's influence in Methodism. In this section, the question whether White read and used Milton is answered in the affirmative, with the caveats that she did so critically and creatively. This is essentially the conclusion of the paper as well, and this segues into my maybe a bit broader critique. I would say that anyone who is well versed on the issue of Ellen White and her literary sources will, or should say, regardless of his or her views on inspiration, that Ellen White was neither a person who never used sources, nor a person who just copy-pasted her views from others. That is, a fair assessment of her use of literary sources has increasingly become that she was an original thinker who nevertheless drew on literary sources critically and creatively. So in a sense, that is maybe not something particularly new. And here I think that two innovations are kind of necessary in scholarship in this area, which an expanded version of the paper could explore. First, there is the need to look beyond apparent similarities of White's writings and older works like Milton to the more critical question of what constitutes originality, influence, borrowing, and tradition, and to what extent. This can only be done by looking at the literary tradition in which an author like Milton writes. On this point, the paper notes briefly that Milton didn't write in a vacuum. We can go further and say that Milton also used sources, for example, the Bible, creatively and critically. And this means that while Paradise Lost became probably one of the most famous accounts of the fall of Lucifer, it is often not original in the way that people may think. One way of using a source is deductive interpretation based on several parts of the source. It's rather irrelevant whether people think that such a deduction is reading something into the text or a correct extrapolation from it. In both cases, from a literary perspective, the text is a source. And many of Milton's ideas are like this. He takes various building blocks from the Bible and creates something out of it. Satan being jealous of Christ. You can actually work your way to this idea if you smoosh together certain parts of the Bible. And this is actually a common trope in medieval Christian literature. In one of the most famous medieval poems from Iceland, for instance, from the 14th century, Satan is depicted as being jealous of Christ, and that's kind of the reason for his fall. And this just goes to show how broadly known this trope was, because Iceland in the medieval period was very remote. And the same can be done with other apparently extra canonical ideas of Milton. For example, the heavenly councils. Much literature has actually been written on this as a motif in not only Hebrew literature, but also in Mesopotamian literature. So Milton moves from Revelation 12, war in heaven, to thinking, well, maybe they discussed this first in councils. Maybe like in earthly politics, you move from political disagreement in the parliament to actual open warfare. But secondly, and maybe more importantly, when it comes to White's use of sources, I think scholarship must move beyond the doctrine of inspiration to a theological and literary analysis. The question of whether White used sources, and if so, to what extent, is not a very fruitful or informative pursuit, not even for the doctrine of inspiration, since by now such inquiry doesn't move the needle for any camp on that doctrine. By moving beyond the doctrine of inspiration, I mean that we can start looking at White as a writer, a theological thinker, without negating her inspiration. God does an info dump on a prophet whose understanding of what she sees or writes is irrelevant. The prophet is in on God's intentions and therefore has a purpose in mind when writing. To understand why Ellen White used literary sources for her great controversy works, then, we must first ask the question why she wrote these works at all. This is something that I think Adventist scholars have not explored sufficiently, because to them God gave her the vision, and that's kind of it. But even if we see White as inspired, we can just reframe the question, why did God choose to give her this vision at that place and at that time? Let me give a suggestive summarization on that point, and I'm almost finished, so hopefully I'm not going too much over time. I think that as early Adventists reconsidered their eschatology after the Great Disappointment, their eschatological reworkings led to theological insights that eventually called for reframing of the Christian meta-narrative, that is, new eschatology, through new light on the motive of cosmic conflict. If one argues, like this, for example, for the historical context of a particular work and for the author's purposes in writing it, one can use these arguments as a lens through which one can then assess the author's use of literary sources. If the purpose of White's redemption history was to integrate new eschatology with the old motive of the cosmic conflict, then comparing her to Milton would necessitate situating Milton and White in the tradition of theodicy and comparing and contrasting them in that regard and context. All in all, I laud the author for taking the next step in studying the relationship between Milton and White, but encourage him to add a few more steps to this exploration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stefansson. We are out of time for now, but of course there were questions, and this could be continued in the panel discussion at 4 p.m. this afternoon. So thank you very much, both Dr. Petre and Dr. Stefansson. We will now move on to our next presentation. Perhaps Dr. Petre, just one very short sentence or a phrase if you would like to add or say goodbye. Please feel free.
Thank you for your feedback. Truly, I think in my paper I tried to move towards that direction and to look at the context, the historical context, but I also wanted to just compare. For me, it was my own study somehow, which resulted in a paper. But thank you for these. I took some notes, and I will. We can continue our discussion. So thank you for this. Appreciate it.